On today's show, we are a week into the postseason, and I feel like there's some lessons the Texas Rangers can learn from what's happened so far and what they should prioritize this offseason. All that and more on this episode of Locked On Rangers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Rangers, your daily Texas Rangers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked onto the World Series champion Texas Rangers. I'm Bryce Patrick, a cripplingly addicted Texas Rangers fan, covering this team for 11 seasons, including all 6 as the founder and host of this podcast. Thank y'all so much for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. If you're not already, you can follow me on Twitter at Bryce Patrick. You can follow the show at Locked On Rangers. Hit subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform and on YouTube, where the best way you can help grow the show is to comment nearly any single thing below. Now, before we get into what we've learned from this first week of postseason action, some former Rangers thriving out there in some petty rivalries. This episode is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah. The right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your baseball rivals. Book today on Booking.com, the official accommodation partner of Major League Baseball. Get the Booking.com app today. Now, here we are a week into the postseason. Already some fantastic series in the division series underway. 3 divisional heated rivalries with the Tigers and, of course, the Guardians playing the Padres and the Dodgers and the Mets and Phillies. I mean, this is, as a neutral, this is about as good as you could hope for. The only thing that could have made this round even more spicy is if we got to see Orioles versus Yankees and we had all division rivalries in the divisional series, but I feel like that would have been asking for maybe a bit too much. But there have already been some lessons that I think I've taken away from watching this postseason. The main of which is the importance of starting pitching in the postseason. And not only the importance of it, but how much it's changed over the last few years and how little, old school ace kind of baseball is, how few starting pitchers are really allowed to go out there and just dominate and change the course of the game. And if you have one of those aces, how much of an impact it can have. I mean, especially early on in these first wild card series, in that series, we really saw the impact of having an ace, how important it was for the Tigers, who had basically one starting pitcher on their entire roster. They took out the Astros because that one starting pitcher was not just any ordinary capable playoff starting pitcher. It was the best pitcher on planet Earth right now in Tarik Skubal. He was absolutely phenomenal, and he wasn't even able to go a full workload of 100 pitches or 7 innings or 8, however many he could have ended up going, because he was dealing with leg cramps, same as Cole Reagans, who went out and absolutely dominated in his first playoff start. We've also seen some amazing starting pitching performances be wasted by an inept offense, or an offense that was just held down by elite starting pitching, whichever way you want to view it, in the Baltimore versus Kansas City matchup. Corbin Burnes went out there and was absolutely amazing, dominant through 8 innings, just 1 run in a game where his team lost 1-0. That would be absolutely maddening if I was an Orioles fan who traded all of this prospect capital to go out and get Corbin Burnes. And the one playoff start you get from him, your team scores 0. Zilch. Nada. We've also seen other decent starting pitching performances that weren't quite ace caliber, that were cut a little bit short, maybe premature. It's difficult to say, but the one that really comes to mind is that one playoff game in the wild card round that went to a game 3, the one series that went to a game 3. You had Tobias Myers versus Jose Quintana on the mound, dueling beautiful games, going about it very, very different ways. Myers has not been a guy who pitches very, very deep into games for the entirety of the season, and so I get sticking by the strategy that got you there. But when a guy is rolling, when a guy is absolutely dominating in a playoff start, and you see him pulled prematurely and his team ends up losing, it gets second guessed to all heck. And I think rightly so. The main instance of this, we can all remember Blake Snell in the 2020 World Series, where he was pulled a bit prematurely. The Rays end up losing that game, end up losing that series. And it's an all-time going back and thinking, what if if Kevin Cash didn't pull his starter, who was absolutely dealing, a now 2-time Cy Young winner. Already at that point had one Cy Young under his belt. I don't think that was the year he won it. I can't remember exactly who won it in the AL in 2020. But Blake Snell was absolutely dominant. And the Rays had an incredible bullpen. So many guys with such great stuff who have been performing well all season long and for years. The Rays had just been phenomenal with their bullpen deployment. But it's the postseason. Sometimes you got to trust that gut, that feel, that oomph. Even when the numbers are telling you one thing, trusting the human touch, the feel for the game, the feel for the moment. It is such an important and incredibly difficult to quantify thing that the best managers out there have. That's something that Bruce Bochy has, for sure. I mean, the touch between knowing the numbers, knowing what the analytics are telling you, knowing what situation you're up against, what these hitters you're facing are up against, and knowing that and balancing that with the human touch of, this is my guy. He's on a heater right now. I'm going to trust him. We saw that a lot in the postseason last year with Bruce Bochy trusting his starters. Sometimes when they got into a little bit too tight of a jam, or knowing exactly when to pull which relievers, when to go with which of ever other relievers. And we saw it time and time again with Nathan Eovaldi working himself into jam after jam after jam, and then working himself out of it. We saw it in almost every single one of his starts, outside of those first two, where he was just basically untouchable for 7 shutout innings against Tampa Bay. Actually, I think that was 1 run that he allowed against Tampa Bay. And then 7 dominant innings in the closeout game of the ALDS at home against the Orioles. And then we saw it a lot in the World Series and later on, especially in the ALCS. And there were so many times where Nathan Eovaldi would work himself into a jam, be in a very, very tight spot, and then work out of it either unscathed or mostly unscathed, and end up giving quality start after quality start after quality start in huge, huge moments. Especially, no other instance more prevalent of that than in Game 5 of the World Series. And I'm remembering that call from Joe Davis of 6 of the hardest fought shutout innings you will ever see, while the other guy on the other mound is pitching a perfect game through 5 innings. Nathan Eovaldi is just struggling, battling all these walks that are super uncharacteristic from him. Definitely didn't have his best stuff. I mean, he had thrown so many innings at that point. I mean, just barely got healthy by the start of the postseason, and then had been dominant through the vast majority of it. And the only one, bad start for Nathan Eovaldi's, level of expectations was Game 1 of the World Series, and the Rangers still ended up winning that one. They were undefeated in Nathan Eovaldi's starts, and I think a large part of it was due to Bruce Bochy knowing when to leave his guys in and when to not. I mean, Myers was pitching an amazing game in that Game 3. 5 innings, just 2 hits, and those were the only base runners that he allowed. And he gets pulled after those 5 innings at 66 pitches. It's insane to me. Absolutely insane to me. So many other starts where the starter's not even going 5 innings, being called, amazing start. Wow, look at these 4 2/3 innings of incredible start from this pitcher. The guy with a 5-run lead, Tanner Bybee, went 4 2/3 innings. He came out there in the first inning of Game 1 of the ALDS, and the Guardians offense just jumped on the pitching chaos of the Tigers. And the Guardians, who have been so good at developing so many homegrown starting pitchers over the last few years, go out there, they spot him 5 runs in that 5th inning. So he goes back, or in that first inning, goes back there in the second. He doesn't make it through to 100 pitches. He doesn't make it through 5 innings even. And it's being called an amazing start. I know it was 4 2/3 shutout innings in a postseason game, but still, I am the last old school guy, the last, yell at clouds old man. But this postseason is turning me into that old man who is yelling at clouds, saying, back in my day, my starting pitchers would always go 6 and give a quality start. They'd go 7. Sometimes they'd even throw 9. I remember when those days were real, when we could have things like that. When we could have, starting pitchers go 7, 8, even 9 innings occasionally. Maybe not always in the postseason, but occasionally you would see those pitchers go deep into games. Alas, I think a lot of that is gone now, and it shows you it's so important to get one of those aces. But how did the Rangers aces stack up, and what else have we learned from this postseason? Talk about all that and more right after this word from our sponsors. This show is brought to you by Arena Club. For most of us that like collecting cards, the idea of spending $2,000 or more on a Patrick Mahomes or Ellie De La Cruz card, it's just not in the cards. I love collecting, but that's some serious money to drop. Thanks to slab packs from arenaclub.com, now it's possible to score gem mints for a fraction of their retail price. Every card that I listed was hit from last week's Arena Club slab pack drop. Arena Club is the only repack that provides real value, a complete view of all possible cards, and clear hit rates for each one. After your pulls are revealed, they'll immediately be placed in your showroom for safekeeping, selling, trading, or auction. The Arena Club grading process is accurate, fast, and transparent, with a full grade rationale provided, an explanation of how your card was scored. Right now, you can get 10% off your first slab pack or card purchase by going to arenaclub.com/LockedOnMLB and use code LockedOnMLB. That's arenaclub.com/LockedOnMLB, code LockedOnMLB for 10% off your first purchase. Shout out to the everydayers for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. I'll be back tomorrow talking a little bit more about this postseason, talking more about this Rangers season in general, looking back, but talking about aces. We have seen some incredible ace performances in these playoffs, the two best of which I've got to say, Michael King in game one against Atlanta. He was absolutely fantastic. Michael King was the lead prospect in the package. I guess he technically wasn't a prospect at that point, but the lead return in the Juan Soto trade from the Yankees, and King absolutely delivered and dominated in his first postseason start and shut down what has been at times a streaky Braves offense, not nearly as good as they were last year, but seeing a postseason starter go 7 innings of shutout ball with no walks and 12 strikeouts. I mean, the swings and misses that he was getting in that game were absolutely incredible, unbelievable. The rest of this offense, didn't have to do all that much outside of a Fernando Tatis Jr. home run in the first inning, which Tatis has been absolutely dominant in these postseasons. Seeing elite postseason hitters reminding me of how good Corey Seager was last year, how great Adolis Garcia was for last postseason, and just remembering wow, it is so beautiful to watch these elite postseason hitters and elite postseason pitchers go on performances like that. But it wasn't just King that has had phenomenal starts. We saw the 8 innings of 1-run ball from Corbin Burns. He looked fantastic. Scuba looked fantastic in his first start. Cole Reagans looked amazing in his first start. But I think that the best outing that I've seen in this postseason so far was Zach Wheeler. Ultimately in a game that his team lost because the Mets, I think, are literally magic this year. I don't know what they've got in them, but every single game the Mets have played has felt like one of the best games I've ever watched down this stretch from that doubleheader, at least the first game of that doubleheader right before the postseason started, to get them into the postseason from all of their games with the Brewers, especially that game 3. It was just absolutely electric. The first 2 games of this Phillies-Mets series have been absolutely dynamic, but Zach Wheeler's start in game 1 was just vintage postseason ace. This guy is one of the best pitchers on planet Earth, and I don't think we talk about him enough, about how incredible he was. Watching him go out there and get 30 swings and misses in a postseason start, go out there and dominate, throwing 111 pitches. I mean, it was just an absolute joy to watch. Just absolutely brilliant to watch. I don't think I've ever seen a postseason start that good. And it's giving me hope for what one day we will hopefully see with Jacob deGrom in his first postseason start. 7 shutout innings, just 1 hit, 9 strikeouts for Wheeler. The bullpen ended up blowing it because, again, the Mets are magic, and it teaches you a different lesson about how many fantastic relievers you have to have out there to be able to go on a run, and also how much it is just a crapshoot. I mean, let's be honest. The playoffs are fluky and random at times, but that's what makes them so beautiful, is that any team can go out there and get on a heater and go on a World Series run like the Rangers. Last year was not the team that Texas thought was going to open up this window and not only make the postseason, but win their first ever title. The window was just barely cracking open last year. And Chris Young did a phenomenal job of reading that team, reading the room, reading the landscape of Major League Baseball last year and saying, okay, we got our chance. Let's freaking go for it. Let's sell off some prospects. Let's make these deals at the deadline. We are a good team. And I'm going to push these chips in, not in a dangerous way, but in a more aggressive way than anybody else was willing to at the trade deadline last year, and go get some guys that can help us win a championship that year. And it worked. Big trade for Jordan Montgomery absolutely worked out. Trade for Max Scherzer hasn't looked as great, but without Max Scherzer's starts in the regular season last year and the couple of outings he was able to get to in the postseason, especially those 3 innings of shutout baseball in Game 3 of the World Series, just an absolutely massive start that I feel like we forget about how important and how great that was from Scherzer in such a big spot of a series that was tied. And not only that, but John Gray going out there and shoving in relief of Max Scherzer, who left the game early with that back injury. It is just such an important lesson to learn. And the Rangers are going to be going all in for it next year as well. We'll see what their offseason spending habits look like. I think that they could definitely use some more help in terms of the starting pitching, because when you look at next year's rotation, I said there are 2 different kinds of starting pitchers. There's basically 3. There's an ace, who is a guy who you feel good about throwing in Game 1 of a postseason. That's my definition of an ace. There's the second level, which is usually a number 2 or a 3 in an average rotation. That's a guy who I would claim is postseason starter capable. Not always your ace, but a guy you feel confident you can throw out there, can give you a quality start or quality enough-ish start, give you 5 innings and 2 or 3 runs in a postseason start, and you feel good about that. And then there's just your depth starters. Guys you can throw out there every 5th day in your rotation in a regular season and can eat you some innings and keep you in ball games and be all right. Usually those are your number 4 or 5 starters in typical rotation. And let's look at what next year's rotation looks like right now. You have your ace, obviously, Jacob deGrom. Kumar Rocker, I would say it's difficult to project out, but I think by the end of next year, if the Rangers are sitting pretty, if he is, having the kind of rookie season that we're imagining from him, we're expecting from him, that he is expecting from himself, then I would say that Rocker is a guy who I'd feel confident throwing in a postseason start. And then behind that, you have John Gray, Cody Bradford, and then either Jack Leiter or Dane Dunning as your number 5 starter. Of those guys, how many do you feel confident starting at a playoff game? Any? Most of them? Probably not most of them. But John Gray is borderline for me. And John Gray's health has been pretty borderline since he got to the Rangers and even before. I mean, this past year, he only threw 102 innings. He missed the last month of the season. He was a .54 player. In 2023, he was much, much healthier, one of the healthiest seasons of his career, but still missed a decent chunk of the final of that early postseason. The Rangers could have really, really used having John Gray healthy in either that ALDS or really especially in the ALCS. They could have used one more healthy starter. He gave them 157 innings last year, the regular season. Came in, was masterful in relief. I mean, those innings in Game 3 of the World Series, heck, even in Game 1 of the World Series, coming out there in relief, he was incredible and so helpful. But in terms of him starting a playoff game, I don't know how great I feel about it. Bradford is, I think, the best candidate to start a playoff game of those 4 that I mentioned, between Gray, Bradford, Leiter, and Dunning. But even then, I'm not entirely sure. I'd really like to see another fully healthy season of Cody Bradford doing what he did this year. It's not to diminish what he did this year. It's just I really want to see it again and again before I feel super confident. But at this point, if the Rangers, were heading into this postseason with the rotation they've got now, I'd say Cody Bradford would have been their Game 3 starter. I feel that confident in what he did this year, unless they weren't in the postseason, which is the result of a whole bunch of other things going wrong. But with Leiter, it's possible, but there's still a long way to go before Leiter even earns himself as legit rotation depth starter, number 4 or 5 starter. He's still got some ways to go before he gets there. He showed some promise this year, but there were definitely a lot of bumps along the road. And for a team that's going to be contending all season long, I don't know how much rope they're going to give Jack Leiter, how much leeway they're going to give Jack Leiter to just figure things out of how to be a starting pitcher at the big league level next year. It's going to be difficult. And it brings me to my point of what the Rangers need to prioritize, who they need to prioritize bringing in free agency, and some other lessons we've learned from this postseason so far. And about all that and more right after this word from our sponsors. This episode of Locked On Rangers is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah. It's time to explore those U.S. cities you've always secretly wanted to learn more about. With hotels, bed and breakfast, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more on Booking.com, you might just find your perfect stay, even in your baseball rival city during the postseason. Maybe it's time to taste test your baseball competition's stadium cuisine, but luckily for you, Booking.com can find you the stadium stay that is just right for you. With Booking.com's wide variety of choices across the U.S., you can go incognito in all your baseball rival cities. Booking.com can help you find the right stay that's close to your home team's or rival team stadium. But no matter what team you're rooting for this postseason, Booking.com can make you a fan of any U.S. cities. The right stay can make you a fan of anywhere, even your baseball rival cities. Booking.com. Booking.yeah. The show is also brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Whether you're wanting to bet on the NFL or the World Series right now, the Yankees are the favorites to win the World Series at plus 220, Phillies at plus 440, tied with the Dodgers, and the Padres just at plus 500 despite an absolute whooping that they laid on the Dodgers in game 2 of that NLDS series. So head over to FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. Now, speaking of those Dodgers and Padres, we saw a phenomenal series so far, a little bit of a blowout, which if you look at the final score is a bit of a misnomer of what happened in game 2 of the NLDS. We saw some former Rangers being big parts of this series. I mean, Dodgers and Padres, a heated rivalry. There were some heated moments and some glorious trolling moments from former Ranger great, former top overall prospect, Jurickson Profar, with a phenomenal troll job against Mookie Betts in the first inning. If you weren't watching, Profar goes into the stands, fights among these fans to get a home run back, to rob it from Mookie Betts. There was some confusion. He intentionally made it look confusing. The broadcast wasn't quite sure if it was a home run or not. They started playing the fireworks and the sounds and the everything, and the television graphic had home run on there as Mookie Betts was rounding the bases. But here, Jurickson Profar is, knowing that he robbed that home run, lets Mookie Betts get around second base before he turns out and shows everyone, hey, look at me. I caught the ball. Not a home run. Also chirping at the fans. There was some back and forth and some really ugly moments from the fans in that game, throwing baseballs at Jurickson Profar, at Fernando Tatis Jr. Profar was absolutely heated when that was happening in the 8th inning, in the 7th inning, actually. There was a moment of visiting on the mound, a delay in the game to find the fan that was throwing baseballs at these Padres players and eject them. Absolutely no excuse for that anywhere in Major League Baseball. I don't care who you are. I don't care who your rival is. I don't care what player. Absolutely disgusting behavior that cannot be tolerated. But you know what else was also disgusting? Yu Darvish's stuff against the freaking Dodgers. 7 innings of 1-run ball, able to get himself out of a jam, mostly unscathed, a bases loaded, no out jam, gets a sac fly that scores the 1 run that he allowed in 7 innings of work, and then gets a line out double play to Luis Arias, the fleetest of foot, the greatest defender, one of the very few non-shortstops. Actually, I think at one point he was a shortstop. I mean, this team is so weird and wild that the vast majority of the players that are everyday players on the Padres were shortstops at one point, including their not quite Gold Glove, but almost it should be Gold Glove finalist center fielder Jackson Merrill, from Xander Bogaerts to Jake Cronenworth, to Fernando Tatis Jr. to Jurickson Profar. I mean, this was a heated matchup, and seeing two former Rangers go out there and dominate. I mean, 7 innings of 1-run ball, and we could have seen a little bit more from Darvish if not for that long delay. He only threw 82 pitches in his 7 innings. I was talking about ace performances, not a whole lot of strikeouts, and one of his 3 was against Shohei Ohtani, who idolized Darvish growing up. Actually, I think 2 of them might have been against Shohei Ohtani, or maybe it was Tanner Scott that struck out Ohtani the second time. Honestly, cannot remember at this point, but seeing those 2 guys go out there and thrive, and seeing these just heated rivalries reminds me of last year in the ALCS, of how emotionally draining every single pitch was. I mean, the postseason is draining no matter what round you're playing, no matter who you're playing. But remembering how absolutely agonizing every single second of that ALCS was, winning or not, even those first 2 games where I wasn't quite sure the Rangers would be able to hold up, even in game 7. I mean, watching that in person with my buddy Matt, we weren't sure what we were watching. And no matter whether the Rangers were up, 2 or 3 or 7 runs, we were like, I don't trust this. I don't trust anything that's going on here. Did not feel safe at all. But feels very safe watching these games, watching these, absolutely agonizing games, I'm sure, for Padres and Dodgers fans, especially for Phillies and Mets fans. I mean, that rivalry is heated and toxic, and the game's going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. It's just got to be exhausting for those fans, the Mets fans who have been doing this for, feels like all season, of just, it's so over, we're so back, might be the team of destiny like the Rangers were last year. But going back to our conversation about aces in the postseason, about how important it is to have those postseason pitchers, a guy who's going to be a free agent this year is Nathan Eovaldi, a guy who is an incredible postseason pitcher, Nathan Eovaldi. And I think that watching this postseason, watching what's going on with this postseason, and just looking at the Rangers roster for next year, I trust the offense to bounce back a whole lot more than I trust just about anything else bouncing back next year. I like what Kumar Rocker did. He is still going to be a rookie next year. And as we saw this year, relying too much on rookies can be a dangerous thing. I mean, the Rangers were expecting a whole lot from Evan Carter and from Wyatt Langford to help bolster an offense that was fantastic last year and make it even better. And that wasn't really the case. We saw a great year from Wyatt Langford overall, but really a lot of that was just a couple of months of him going off. I mean, the last month of the season where he was phenomenal, AL Rookie and Player of the Month in September, that's great. It's a great sign for next year. The Rangers can rely more on him to probably be their second best hitter next year. I thought he might be this year, ended up not quite being the case. I'd still say that Josh Smith overall had a better season than Langford. I mean, in terms of the impact that he had for the vast majority of this season, but still the Rangers relying a lot on Rocker, which we don't know how many starts Rocker is going to have next year. I don't think there's going to be a strict innings limit, but he only threw 50 this year. This is his first year coming back from Tommy John surgery. And so we'll see if he can be healthy throughout the whole year, if there's going to be any kind of innings limit, any kind of start limit. I'm hoping that, Rocker is just, the wheels are off, the training wheels are off, and he can just go out there and be dominant. But you also have to wonder about Jacob deGrom and how many starts he's going to make, how healthy he's going to be. He's going to be heading into his age 36 season. And so adding one more guy that you feel good about giving the ball to in a postseason, whether it's game 1, game 2, game 3, wherever, Nathan Eovaldi is that guy. not to mention how beloved he is in the clubhouse, not to mention the kind of impact that he has on the entirety of the staff and has from the moment he walked in the door. I think watching this postseason, you got to think, wow, the Rangers need some more starting pitching. You can never have enough aces. I mean, we saw it with the Padres. They had three guys that I would call at least ace adjacent, if you will. And Joe Musgrove goes down in his first start, not able to make it through 5 innings because he is already having Tommy John surgery, making their staff just a little bit thinner. Still, I think one of the most well-rounded starting pitching staffs that we have in this postseason. The Dodgers, I think what's going to sink them is they don't have enough starting pitching, even though they went out and spent $1 billion on just two guys who pitch, one of whom is not going to pitch this year, almost certainly in Shohei Ohtani, but they also spent $300 million on Yamamoto. They also brought back Clayton Kershaw. They also made a trade for Tyler Glasnow and gave him $100 million in extension. They also traded at midseason for Jack Flaherty, and they still don't have enough starting pitching, not to mention all the other young guys who have been in their rotation, who have had all this kind of promise. Bobby Miller ended up being, terrible for them this year. And last year he looked absolutely phenomenal. And Walker Buehler is going to be a free agent this year. He has missed so much of the last few seasons with injuries. He might be a guy who the Rangers prioritize and target in the offseason. He's not going to be raking in some kind of $300 million deal like Yamamoto, but I think he could be a candidate for the Rangers to buy low on and, really, really benefit from someone who, at his best can be that kind of ace, can be that kind of guy who you throw out there in a postseason start and feel really, really good about. I mean, I could end up looking silly with Walker Buehler going out there and looking very, very bad in his next postseason start, but still the upside is there. And I think if the Rangers are going to have to be cost cutting with all of the question marks of the TV deal and making your own regional sports network that are going to be coming over the next few years and how they spend their cash and things like that, I think that could be an option. But if the Rangers want to get back to the postseason and make a run through the postseason, bringing back Nathan Eovaldi after watching these couple of games and watching what this team has done all season, it has got to be priority number one. Somewhere you cannot cheap out. You cannot afford to just let him walk. You need this guy back, and he has got to be the most important thing that you do this offseason is bringing that man back in a Texas Rangers uniform for at least next year, if not several years to come. That's going to do it for today's show. Thank y'all so much for listening and subscribing, and until next time, don't forget to enjoy World Series champion Texas Rangers baseball.